His truth is marching on? Suzanne Marsh, San Antonio, Texas, 1915. The small white-haired wizen-faced man sat rocking on his whitewashed front porch. He was watching for his son, his wife and 2 boys. He was a retired major general. His name was John Clem. He had been waiting to see them since early morning. He had finally decided it was time to tell his son and grandsons about his adventures as a 10-year-old drummer boy during the Civil War. He had never felt the need to disclose the nickname that he carried all these years, Johnny Shiloh. It was a time of strong patriotism and a time when brother fought against brother, father against son. He remembered it all. He dug out his blue uniform, but also a tattered gray one. When he held the tattered gray uniform, he felt the tears stream down his weathered cheeks. He carried the uniforms downstairs. Shortly after his doorbell rang, there stood his son John Clem Jr. and his 2 grandsons, Matt and Lucas. He looked at the 3 of them. Yes, it was time, he thought, to tell them the stories of his days as a Union drummer boy. "Come on, boys, I want to sit outside in my rocking chair." He went back outside, seated himself in the rocking chair. His son sat on the other chair, as his grandson sat on the steps. He rocked for several minutes before he began. "I reckon the 3 of you are pondering why I would want to talk to you all together. I ain't gettin' any younger, so I reckon the 3 of you need to know about me. I ain't good at storytellin', but I think it is time I told my story." He cleared his throat as he looked off onto the horizon. "I was 10 years old when our Civil War began. I tried to enlist with the 3rd Ohio. They wouldn't take me because I was a small 10-year-old boy then. Pop would not allow me to go, but I had other ideas in my mind. I wanted to serve in Mr. Lincoln's army." Mr. Lincoln was a man I held in very high regard, just as I did Pop. I drilled every day. With the 3rd Ohio, I left school so I could. Pop was really mad about that, but I was a very determined boy. When the 3rd was called up, they wouldn't take me. As a drummer boy, I was underage and small for my 10 years, hell, I ain't much taller. Now, I was determined to join a regiment and fight. The 22nd Michigan came marching through Newark, Ohio. I pleaded my case, and I was inducted into the Union Army. Pop was mad but knew there was nothing he could do. I learned to be a soldier as we marched and counter-marched in our camp. I learned to use a bayonet and fire a musket. One of the men cut down a musket to make it easier for me to handle. My original musket was bigger than I was. Battle of Shiloh, 1862? It was a beautiful spring. Several of the boys went into the old Dunker church to pray. Before the battle, I went too. We were praying when mortar shells began to pour into our camp. The Rebs was leavin' a calling card. We ran back to our unit. The mortar shells rained down on us. I ain't feared to admit I was scared. I grabbed my drum, I began the long roll, as I was taught to do. I stood stock still, drummin' away. A fragment from a shell crashed through my drum, damnedest thing you ever did see. It knocked me out fair a few minutes. When I come to, most of the boys were gone. I continued the long drum roll until I fell asleep on my feet. I guess someone took me and a drum back to my unit. It twere that battle that earned me the name Johnny Shiloh. His son and grandson stared. They were having a hard time equating this wizen-faced old man with Johnny Shiloh. The 3 of them had studied about the Battle of Shiloh, reading about the drummer boy with a great deal of courage, never realizing it was their father and grandfather. "Grandpa, you are Johnny Shiloh, we just studied about you this week." "Pop, why didn't you tell me this years ago?" "I didn't think it was time, son, but now that I have retired from the army I thought it was time." "Pop, is that when you shot and killed that Reb officer?" "No, Chickamauga, Georgia. I was promoted to corporal. Chickamauga Battle, 1863? The Battle of Chickamauga was a bad time. Georgia was a far piece from Newark, Ohio. I can still see the battlefield in my mind. It was September, the leaves was changin' color. I was homesick, but I was also regular army. I carried a drum and a gun. I sounded the long drum roll. Our unit formed up. We marched toward Horseshoe Ridge. I was separated from my unit. I was scared, I had no idea where I was. I put my drum down, muskets began to fire. I had 3 bullet holes in my kepi when the day was done. I was still lookin' fair my unit when some Confederate colonel yelled at me, "Stop, you little Yankee!" Devil. I wasn't gonna stop, I kept runnin', he rode after me. I turned and fired my musket. Shot and killed him. He fell from his horse. I finally located the 22nd Michigan. I was also known as the drummer boy of Chickamauga after that. I was promoted to sergeant. I was also captured by Reb Cavalry while in Georgia. Cavalry under fightin' Joe Wheeler that really scared the hell out of me. I was in their midst for a few days. Some low-down skunk stole my blue uniform. On of the Rebs his name were Billy Smith, found me a uniform to wear. It weren't a blue one but a gray one. I eyed up the horse flesh trying to figure which one was fastest. I wasn't planning on being sent to Andersonville, so escape was the only thing I could do. I got my chance late one evening. I crept out of the tent where I was being held. Ran fair all I was worth, jumped on that horse, rode as fast as I could. I sure did not want to risk capture at this stage. I rode into camp, almost got my damn fool head blowed off. One of the men on guard duty recognized me. "Johnny Shiloh, is that you?" "Sure is, Sam." I sure sighed a sigh of relief. I was discharged September 1864, rank of sergeant. He stood up and stretched, then motioned the 3 into the house. There he showed them his Union uniform. He fingered the material. "This one is the one that a group of ladies made for me. The men had saved in case I turned up." Then he picked up the gray uniform. Tears formed in his eyes. "This is the Reb uniform that Billy gave me." He raised his musket to shoot me, but he didn't. Why? I don't know. I reckon I never will. Billy died in the Battle of Stone Mountain. I saw his body. I reckon there are things that are just too painful to remember. He placed the gray uniform back where it had been for all those years. He then placed the blue uniform on top of it. "Pop, come on, sit down. Matt, get Grandpa a glass of lemonade." Matt went to the kitchen where his grandma gave him 4 glasses. His story now complete, he returned to his rocking chair. His son and grandson stood at the screen door watching as he began to rock once again, staring off in his memories. They heard him humming the battle hymn of the Republic, then in a trembling voice he sang, "His truth is marching on."